The death of Mao Zedong on September 9, 1976, marked not only the changing of hands of the CCP leadership, but also the beginning of a new era of Chinese history. In the months following the chairman's funeral, the Gang of Four, Mao's last wife, Jiang Qing, and three of her revolutionary comrades vied for political supremacy with the designated successor, Hua Guofeng. But ultimately, they were torn from their seats of power and put on trial for the excesses of the Cultural Revolution. Though deft in his ousting of the gang, Hua himself would prove only an interim leader, being outmaneuvered in turn by a rehabilitated Deng Xiaoping. Following his rise to supremacy in 1978, Deng rallied support to begin steering the nation away from the Maoist model of development and toward a market-oriented system. The household responsibility system, initiated in 1981, decollectivized farming, dividing communal lands among rural families, and making individual households responsible for the profits and losses of their agricultural production. The Iron Rice Bowl, this promise of cradle-to-grave support for military personnel and urban state employees, was partially retracted in favor of competitive job selection and employer-based health care. Rationing systems and state-controlled pricing gradually gave way to market supply and demand, and special economic zones, these administrative regions with relaxed business and trade regulations, transformed a handful of designated cities into the primary engines of China's economic growth. This 改革开放, literally reform and opening up, was part of economic liberalism, which witnessed the remaking of the PRC and a shift of the ideological center from Mao to market. With the more liberal wing of the Communist Party growing in power in this environment of pragmatism, some began to call for political reform. In April of 1989, after the death of liberal reformer Hu Yaobang, students from Peking, Tsinghua, and other universities in Beijing began to gather in Tiananmen Square to mourn Hu and erect shrines in his remembrance. As this informal gathering became more organized and eulogizing evolved into broader political critique, the students staged a month-long sit-in followed by a hunger strike during the Mikhail Gorbachev state visit. Millions of students participated in such demonstrations across all of China in every major city. Martial law was ultimately declared at the end of May, and on June 4th, armed PLA tanks and troops were sent to clear the square by force. Across the strait, Taiwan experienced democratic reform amid continued economic growth. In 1986, the Democratic Progressive Party was established as the first opposition party to the Kuomintang, and in the following year, martial law was lifted on the island for the first time since the Civil War. A decade later, Taiwan attempted its first direct presidential election. Fearing that separationists would assume control of the government, the PRC launched a series of test missiles off the coast of Taiwan to alter voter sentiments in favor of pro-unification incumbents. This act of aggression, later known as the Taiwan Strait Crisis, provoked U.S. President Bill Clinton to provide Taiwan with naval support and sign the Taiwan Relations Act. Ultimately, the developmental path of the PRC would diverge from that of Taiwan. Economic liberalization would not be accompanied by political liberalization. Yet even after formally retiring from office, Deng would continue to strengthen the national commitment to economic reform by appointing Zhu Rongji, the former mayor of Shanghai, as vice premier, and personally visiting the SEZs, the special economic zones of Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and Zhuhai on his celebrated 1992 southern tour. Jiang Zemin, perhaps in recognition of the importance of economic growth for national stability, would continue Deng's legacy by relegating most of China's economic governments to Zhu Rongji, who would complete the breaking of the Iron Rice Bowl and launch a massive initiative to develop cities in inland China. Under the succeeding reigns of Hu Jintao and, more recently, Xi Jinping, China continued along its trajectory of rapid economic growth, though the negative consequences of these decades of unrestrained development became increasingly apparent. The country now faces an aging demographic. Single-child couples will each have to support 4 elderly parents. It faces problems of environmental degradation. Air pollution in Beijing is now so severe that the acceptable smog standard was increased just so they would reach fewer days with critical levels of air pollution. It faces the constant threat of an overheated economy, ghost cities void of inhabitants. The products of official corruption and overambitious central planning can now be found in hidden pockets across the mainland. The future of China remains uncertain. Yet so far, in the face of these daunting obstacles, the CCP and the nation it governs have proven supremely resilient. The question then, as we enter the final part of our course, is, does China have the adaptive capacity to continue to meet these growing challenges? Or perhaps, put in a more direct way, will the 21st century be the century of China?